Count slowly and clearly from 1 to 10.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Slowly and clearly.
1.
Normally, I hate it when people say stuff like this prematurely, but I genuinely believe that after only one episode, HBO's The Last of Us is probably the greatest video game adaptation of all time. I absolutely love The Last of Us. I was a fan of the first game when it came out in 2013. I actually like Part 2 narratively for the most part, and I just finished playing The Last of Us Part 1 for the first time, the new remaster, remake, whatever you want to call it, yesterday, and I've been looking forward to this show for such a long time. I genuinely don't know the last time that I was this excited, this hyped, this just insanely needing to see, watch, play, do anything in my life as I have been with The Last of Us on HBO. But anyway, welcome to my channel. If this is the first video of mine that you've happened upon, I do TV show discussions, trailer reactions, movie discussions, that sort of thing, and I talk about survival horror gaming a lot, so consider subscribing. And I'm going to talk about every episode of the new Last of Us TV show as it comes out, the night that it airs. I'm going to do spoiler discussions, just give you my overall thoughts, my first reaction to it. Before I start telling you about how I feel about the first episode, I want you to tell me about what you thought of the first episode in the comments, but more specifically, tell me which portrayal of these characters you like the most and which portrayal so far you like the least. But anyway, let's get into it. My review for episode 1. This isn't going to be a play-by-play. I'm not going to tell you every single thing that happens step by step. I'm just going to give you my general thoughts. And my general thoughts are, wow. The first episode is pretty much doing everything that I personally would want from The Last of Us show in terms of portrayals by the actors, the tone, the atmosphere, the world building that they're doing. Everything I wanted to see extended upon and expanded upon, they're expanding upon it. Every key moment that I wanted to be there has been there so far. Pedro Pascal as Joel, amazing so far. Probably my favorite part of the show, obviously, but Bella Ramsey as Ellie, really good. She was the character, the portrayal that sold me the quickest. Like, as soon as she was on screen for the first time, as soon as she delivered her first piece of dialogue, I was in. I knew that I was gonna love this character. I really like Tess. I really like Marlene. I really like what we've seen of Tommy. Let's just get that out of the way. Portrayals, I feel like, are as good as they possibly could be for a live action adaptation. If you've played The Last of Us video game, you know that it is very emotional, very fast. And luckily, I feel like the show replicates that emotion pretty much as good as it could. The prelude, the prequel, what have you, the events that happened in 2003 that happened pre-Outbreak is pretty much everything it needed to be. We got to know Joel as a character. We got to know Tommy as a character. Not too much, because the vast majority of their character development and us as the viewer or as the player, if you're playing the game, getting to know them happens throughout the duration of the story. But we got just enough to know what their life was before the outbreak. Just enough to know what they've lost and how it shaped who they become and who they are at the start of the actual adventure. One of the main things that I needed this show to do, that I desperately wanted this show to do and not fail at it, is make everything feel like a threat. Every human enemy needs to feel like a threat, and every infected needs to feel like a threat. Like, for example, I was a fan of The Walking Dead when it aired. And after a certain point in time, the walkers in The Walking Dead stopped feeling like genuine threats, and the human enemies stopped feeling like genuine threats. They just felt like things there for the main character to kill, to be threatening, but they weren't really threatening. Luckily, that is not the case so far in The Last of Us show. Whenever one of the characters was put up against an adversary, be it human or infected, it was terrifying. Like, this show is scary. Like, there's scenes, moments, shots, visuals in this show that is straight up horror. And of course there's horror moments in the game, but I wouldn't really call it a horror game as much as it is a adventure game. But this show is already more scary than I personally was expecting it to be, and I'm very thankful for that. In terms of what happens plot-wise in this episode, it's the basic setup that any Last of Us fan knows if you played the game, and that's Joel has a daughter. Spoiler alert, by the way, if you haven't watched the episode, go watch it and then come back and watch this. But his daughter dies, 20 years go by, he's in the Boston quarantine zone being run by Fedra. There's Fireflies, which are like a militia group. Fedra agents consider them terrorists, but they're kind of the good guys in terms of the grand scope of the United States. Joel has a smuggling partner named Tess. One thing leads to another, and they're stuck with Ellie, who is bitten but not turned. And then Marlene, the head of the Fireflies, tasks them with bringing her to the old state house, I believe, in the show. They said they wanted them to bring her to the old state house, but in the video game, they wanted them to bring her to the Capitol. But anyway, that's the main plot of the first episode, and in terms of pacing, I feel like that is the perfect setup for the first episode. I feel like it began where it should have began, obviously, and I feel like it ended in a very comfortable ending zone. Like, we got just enough to be really hooked, to understand this world, to understand the characters, but it ended at just the right point to make me so hyped for next week, to continue this adventure, to continue this journey. In terms of how faithful this first episode is to the video game, it is essentially pretty faithful, completely faithful for the most part. But however, there is one question mark I have, one thing that's being changed, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing. Of course, I'm not going to say it's a bad thing this early. I'm just waiting to see how it plays out, but I do have my suspicions. I hope that it's as good as it was in the game. And that is Joel's relationship with his brother Tommy 20 years later. In the video game, he's distant from Tommy. They apparently had a falling out. He knows where Tommy lives, but he has no interest in talking to him, reaching out to him. He has no choice of going to the settlement until, of course, he has to later on down the road. But that's not the case in the first episode of the show. In the first episode of the show, we're led to believe that Joel and Tommy are still close. Joel is trying to reach out to Tommy. He's trying to help Tommy for some reason that we're not sure yet. And he's actively trying to chart a course west to find Tommy, which is, again, different from Joel, who was very upset about needing to leave Massachusetts in the first place. In the game, he really did not want to leave. So that's one thing I noticed that's very different. And I'm curious if I'm going to like it as much as I do in the game, because in the game, he didn't really want to bring Ellie out west. He was really against it, but the main thing that changed him was Tess. Tess asked him to do it, and he ended up doing it. I have a feeling in the show, the main motivation of him bringing Ellie out west is going to have to do with Tommy, and that's going to change some fundamental things in the plot and some fundamental things about Joel and Tess's relationship and Joel and Tommy's relationship. Not saying it's a bad thing, I'm just curious to see the rest of this plot unfold in the future. But anyway, that's my first impressions, my first overall reaction on the first episode of HBO's The Last of Us. I literally just got done watching it. It's still on my TV over there on the credits. I paused as soon as it was over, came over here, recorded this, but yeah. Sorry if my thoughts were all jumbled. But let me know what you thought about the first episode of The Last of Us, because I'm genuinely curious. I haven't reached out to anyone I know in real life to know their thoughts. I haven't watched reviews. I haven't looked at Rotten Tomatoes scores. I don't like doing that. I like judging stuff on my own and then knowing what other people think. So now I'm at that point where I want to know what other people think. Let me know in the comments, and again, consider subscribing. I do TV show discussions, trailer reactions, movie discussions, that sort of thing. And I talk about survival horror gaming on this page a lot. So just consider subscribing if you liked this video and you want to see more like it. Thank you for watching, especially if you watched this far.